Hi everyone, I'm KeithDeStone and I'm here again with Greg Nagy and Casey and Claudia and Natasha and Sarah. And we're here to talk about heroes as usual and the Odyssey today, and specifically the land of the Lotus Eaters, along with other things. So thanks for joining us.
Because our dear Natasha can only stay with us for about 15 minutes, I want to make sure that I I with a I I want to make sure that with very broad brushstrokes, I justify my suggestion that we talk about the Lotus Eaters. But while Natasha is still with us, maybe if I could talk about one other thing, which has to do with Sappho and how the poetry of Sappho, the song making of Sappho, is so important for understanding the Iliad and Odyssey both, and because all of you here have experience in trying to weave the song making of Sappho into the general uh, the general idea of what is a hero. Could I mention one thing about Sappho that just occurred to me, and I'd love to have your reactions, maybe especially Natasha's reactions first, because you have to leave before anybody else does. And that is, thanks to Claudia, uh, I'm working with her and with Greg Crane of Perseus in trying to weave the songs of Sappho into, shall we say, the Perseus repertoire. And it's very hard to do because if you look at, for example, the standard edition of Sappho, and I'm going to reach for it. This is by Camillo Neri, and my goodness, it's over 1,000 pages. It's the last printed page, counting the indexes. Oh my God, is 1,124. And I was saying to Claudia earlier that if you just look at those parts of Sappho in this humongous book, where you have enough words of the fragmentary survival of Sappho's texts, where you have enough words that you can make sense of the syntax of the words, and syntax is going to be an important concept, then I'm estimating, Claudia, that what I will deliver to you as the complete set of working translations of Sappho's syntactical survivals will be about 5% of the total edition, where most of the things you see are square brackets, dots, uh, a couple of letters here, maybe half of a word there. And so somebody like Anne Carson, who is a very gifted poet, can say, and I love the whimsy of her premise. She can say, well, my poetry in translating Sappho is fragmentary. So just as Sappho has fragments, I have fragments of poetry. But what I want to do is much more modest, which is just to give working translations of those parts of Sappho where we have any syntax at all. And as I say, if you if you put those all together, it's not much more than 5% of everything that's in the standard edition by Camillo Neri, a beautiful edition. And so syntactical Sappho, I'm curious what kind of reaction you have to that, because it's also relevant, isn't it, to Homeric poetry. Certainly, we who are interested in heroes in Homeric poetry are interested in Homeric syntax, and poetic translations of Homer don't necessarily give you an idea of what's really going on in the nuts and bolts. Now, that was too long an expose of what I'm also interested in today. Natasha, since now you have just X minutes, maybe you want to react first. Just improvise whatever you think.
Sure. I love the idea. So one thing that comes to my mind, which is not directly relevant to Homeric poetry, but relevant to sort of the broader reception of Sappho, is a tiny example. So there is in one of the fragments a word in Sappho which is adu logos, and I think it does not appear in like any context. So this is really sort of it's on the verge between syntax and morphology. So just something which is sweet of the talking but what I love is that on one of the vases, red figure vases that I have seen, there are a chariot which is drawn by two erotas, and one of the erotas is called Edulogos, so it has the same name, and which I think just kind of opens the whole vista of connection between poetry of Sappho and fifth century red figure vase representation, and sort of so in a tiny morphological palette there can be packed enormous amount, sort of like the whole strand of a tradition.
I love that because in terms of pure linguistics, even a compound adjective like adulogos or hedulogos, if it were in Ionic Greek, even a compound has syntax. So that is admissible in syntactical Sappho because a compound you have to unpack and say, well, what are the parts? I think of the Sanskrit word for a certain kind of compound, which is bahuvrihi, which means much rice, but it really means syntactically he or she who has much rice. So that's already syntax, not just morphology. So that's a beautiful example. Wow. And I love the idea of sweet words or sweet speaking, not just words, because they're spoken words. So that
Another
definitely,
example of a word like that that has so much resonance is one that I completely learned from you, Greg, which
oh,
is in the Sappho 44 with the
oh,
Theo ekoloi.
oh, oh my,
So this is a word that, like, if you read Sappho understanding Homer, and if you read Homer understanding Sappho,
wow, yes,
it's so much from both readings, because it's a word that means like the gods, and it's applied to Hector and Andromache on their wedding day. But it's also the word that is so very much associated with Achilles and his
yes,
short life,
yes.
um,
Oh my
and
God.
his godlike abilities and nature, but he is going to die so young, and being immortal, and even young for a mortal, right? Basically, a teenager in battle, and
Yeah,
likewise, Hector and Andromache are so they're like gods on their wedding day, but they're doomed, right? And so you see this
beautiful.
glorious wedding song that is tinged with grief, much as the Iliad, with all of its chaos and glory, is steeped in grief.
Yeah, and you know what, dear Casey, what you just said, and if I weave what you said, sweet words, together with the sweet words of Natasha, both these examples are because we're dealing with compounds, not just morphology, but syntax. Because I immediately think also of Sappho 31, where the bridegroom is compared um, to be just like a god.
Yes.
That already is, you see the syntax there, but you see the syntax also in the compound. So I love these examples. And so let's include both of them in syntactic Sappho. But here's another one that you two have inspired me to include, which is, are you ready for this? Pan nuhisdein, which in Ionic would be pan nuhisdein, which means um, do an all-nighter, all-nighter. And that is definitely syntactical Sappho because Panduhidzain is only for women and girls. No boys allowed except when they are, um, dear Natasha, cupids, or as you call them, erotes. And why not call them erotes? Because unlike Italian Renaissance cupids, who are chubby babies, um, um, frankly, painted cupids in classical painting and earlier, as in the era of, let's say, Sappho, would be beefy adolescent boys.
So
They're
what are they all
definitely.
night doing? What are these? What are,
Oh, so now, dear Casey, may I advertise? I've got 3 books on Sappho, and the second one, which Claudia is the editor for, is full of vase paintings, and Natasha helped me track down many of these vase paintings. The vase painter is called May Diaz, the May Diaz painter, and I think I can prove, Casey, that the May Diaz painter, whose era is sort of the second half of the 5th century, he must have gone to concerts where, um, as a concert goer, 20,000, 30,000 people listening to this would have heard um, KeithDeStone, that's to say, singers who accompany themselves on the kithara, actually singing songs of Sappho. And
oh,
so I'm not saying that, oh, this is a reference to passage XYZ in Sappho. I'm saying that the May Diaz painter, we don't know his name, we just know the studio where he worked. And the boss there was May Diaz. The May Diaz painter actually has a huge, uh, huge paintings of all-night parties where you see only female characters and 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 some winged cupids.
well,
Male
I mean,
cupids.
that makes perfect sense. I mean, there was so many religious festivals that were women only, right? And then
Yeah,
it was like kind of all night revelry. So,
So I was just thinking about the other age of the end of the age spectrum, and we've got Nestor, Hey Dué Pace,
yeah. Oh
and
my
Odyssey
God, Sarah.
Agoretes. Um,
Oh,
Nestor, whose word is sweet,
yeah.
pouring out these words to the assembled Achaeans in Iliad 1.
And some people would argue, I'm not ready to argue it. I don't dare argue it, but epos in Homeric diction is not just words, it's hexameter words. So he's good at doing hexameters because, of course, the muses who were there and who saw everything and heard everything, and they're quoting Nestor going on and on and on with his beautiful epics. Um, People ask me, well, if the muses heard everything and they know exactly what happened, when we read quotations from, let's say, Nestor, um, what did it sound like? I said it sounds like dactylic hexameter because it was dactylic hexameter because gods and goddesses and male and female heroes spoke in hexameters, of course. And so he du epes for Nestor. I'm so glad you tracked that down, Sarah. That's also, shall we say, part of the poetics that maybe in that case it's not just whose performed songs are sweet, but whose performed dactylic hexameters are sweet. Let's just say for a certain era. That's being maybe too fanciful, but anyway, wow. And what you all said so far, I think can link very well with what we could talk about next, which is the land of the Lotus Eaters, where
well,
again,
should we get any last thoughts from Natasha before she has
oh
to?
yes, but before we go to there, last thoughts from Natasha before you engage with the kids.
Just to say that that vase that I quoted with Hedu Logos is precisely by the Medias painter. So he is really whatever they are. The painter seems to be tapping in the world of Sappho. And one of the things that I am particularly curious is all these other representations of women on the rocky grounds. Which like always make me think of somehow women are not supposed to be on the rocky grounds unless there is a religious festival of
Yeah. Oh,
so
yes, exactly. And I'm so glad you mentioned festivals because festivals are places where you can forget yourself.
yes, and it can be good or
Yeah,
it
good
can be bad.
forgetting.
So that sweetness can be the good sweetness or the bad sweetness in the case of Lotus Eaters. So I'm ready for plunge
But
into
here,
the Lotus Eater land.
but Natasha, before you go, I just want mention one other thing is that if people think when they read "O Land of the Lotus Eaters" that the lotus is like the Indian lotus, the lotus of India, but it's pretty clear from the Homeric description that it's simply something that cows and sheep, cattle and sheep munch on. It's fodder. It's generic things
Oh,
that you eat, but it's sweet. It's sweet to the taste. And the karpuz
wow.
is not the fruit of the lotus, it's the harvest of the lotus.
Mm.
Because after all, the karpuz is cognate with English harvest. The
Wow.
etymology, the Indo-European etymology of harvest is karpistos. It's not the most fruity, it's the most harvestable harvest. And so what the lotus eaters are munching on, may I put it that way, they're munching. They're munching on the kind of fodder, Fodder, that let's say cattle and sheep munch on, but it's sweet. And then you say, well, if it's so sweet, then you want to talk about it, don't you? Or can you talk about it, etc. So it's all relevant, and thanks to this amazing group, the relevance is coming out, I think. So let me be quiet because Keith, I know you have to exit fairly soon. You should have some latest words, not last words, latest words. I'm sure
Well,
there will be
Natasha gave us a
new.
beautiful connection to the Lotus Eaters. I was looking at a translation of it from the source book, and what the crew of Odysseus were eating is described as delicious. And I was trying to
Yeah,
track down the Greek to see where that translation came from, and I haven't gotten that far yet um, to see what Greek word is being translated there as delicious.
but you know
But
what's really fun, dear Keith, is that the word nostos, meaning homecoming, has not survived in modern Greek except as an adjective. And the adjective is nostimos. But you know what nostimos means? It doesn't mean having to do with homecoming or having to do with a song about homecoming. It means delicious.
right, right.
How do you like them?
Wait, nostimos means delicious?
Yeah, it means delicious. So
Wow.
in a restaurant, if the waiting person asks, "So, well, how did you like it?" You say "Πολύ nostimo," very nostimo.
Oh, that is amazing. I gotta write this down.
Just like Mama used to make it, or something.
And what Keith is referring to here, and I love this, is when Odysseus goes to the island of Circe, and first he thinks that it might be Ithaca. And, just as many archaeologists today, and Casey is a witness, you just went to Ithaca, but there'll be archaeologists who say, oh, no, no, it's not in Ithaca, it's somewhere else. So anyway, he goes to an island. He thinks it's Ithaca, but then he goes all the way to the top of the highest elevation. So he has a better sense of looking around and seeing what's going on. Okay. And as he's looking around, he realizes, nah, this is not home. And what he's looking for is smoke coming out of the familiar place. And the smoke is, guess what? Mom's home cooking. And and uh-oh, this is not home. And it turns out to be the island of Circe, which means that he's going to lose his orientation. When he comes down, he has this very pessimistic speech to his companion saying, I no longer know where the sun rises and the sun sets because this is not home. And I was looking for smoke that comes from good old home cooking and didn't find it from familiar places. It's not home. And so
When
then
when I was in Ithaca, I was very amused. I was just wandering around the streets, and there was a cross street where there was like the street of Odysseus crossed with the street of Nostos.
oh,
It was so perfect.
oh boy, oh boy.
Um,
And you know, Casey, one thing I just have to share, which is that it's interesting that in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, the suffering of a hero or heroes is alga, which gives us such pseudo-medical terms as analgesic for aspirin and anti-pain. Okay, so alga is pains, and you have it the pains of the Achaeans and the Trojans fighting in the Trojan War at the beginning of the Iliad. You have the pains of Odysseus going zigzag and trying to make his way home, Nostos, okay? And so there are algae in both places. So now get this, there was a psychiatrist, one of the earliest psychiatrists we know of historically, who was asked by the Pope to figure out why the Swiss guards, who were the bodyguards of the Pope, were so depressed. And so he figured out, oh, because they're homesick. And so he coined the word nostalgia. Nostalgia it's a Greek compound, but it's not attested in Greek. It's just coined by a proto-psychiatrist who was trying to say why the Swiss guards were so homesick.
that's
Nostalgia.
great. But we do have, I love it, but we do have Nostos and Algae, together, right? In the opening
Yes, of
of the
course.
of the Odyssey. So it's like it makes sense, but yeah, he had to make up the word for it. That's great.
I'm so glad
Um,
you added that because exactly in the first 5 lines of the Odyssey, you have both the word nostos and you have the word alga, both.
and it connects very well to what you were saying about the smoke rising from home and the home cooking, because of course nostalgia is all about home and missing your mother's meals and missing
Yes.
the things you're familiar with there, the smells, everything.
Oh, I just love it. I love it. Yeah.
I was just looking at I just looked really quick at the Greek passage that Keith was referencing when talking about the Lotus Eaters, where Odysseus's men who encounter the Lotus Eaters in book 9, they forget about home, right? Or they want to forget about home as they eat it because it's so delicious, like you were saying. But as I'm looking at it, it says, just this connects to an earlier discussion we have, it's meli edea. So
Yeah,
it's sweet like honey.
honey sweet nostos.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
honey sweet. So I guess the translator translated it as delicious.
Yeah, that was
Unless
Butler, I
it's a
think.
different word. But
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
but yeah, but it's great to see that it has this again, this sweetness,
Perfect.
which and associating with poetry and how and of course Odysseus is going to go by the sirens, singing about the Trojan War and not being able to resist it, or he's able to resist it by being tied to the mast, but most people wouldn't be able to resist it. So this idea of sweetness being something you can't resist, something you can't let go of, but it connects to both poetry and in this case it's like if they kept eating this they would not have a nostos and there would not be a song that was sung about them, so there'd be no kleos, no nostos. There would
Nothing.
only be they would just stay forever eating this honey sweet or sweet like honey karpos,
Love
the
it.
fruit, the harvest of this lotus plant.
Oh, I just
So I promised that I would talk to you about Greg, my favorite scene in the original Percy Jackson movie.
Yes, please, please.
I haven't seen the TV show, so I don't know how they do it there, but in the original Percy Jackson movie, they have this incredible scene where they go to a casino, which of course casinos are designed to sort of trap you. There are no windows. You're not supposed to know if there's light, if it's day or night. You just keep playing and putting your money in the machine or on the poker table or whatever. And they're playing that Lady Gaga song, Poker Face. And they just, they do it in such a way that is just like so propulsive and like, again, like inescapable, you can't get out. And they are serving, just like in casinos, they give you free drinks, right? So they give you free alcohol to, again, keep you there, have you have no sense of where, time or place. And then but in this scene, we're dealing with teenagers, right? So they're giving them these things that look like the image of the lotus that you probably have in your mind, and they obviously taste really sweet and really good, and they can't stop eating them, but as long as you eat them, you won't ever want to leave. And eventually I think they find someone who's been there since like the 70s or something, like who's never left. But and then my favorite thing though about the scene, I have to just say personally, other than everything that I've just said, is that when they finally are able to escape, it's because just how like you sometimes have at a casino, like a big prize that you're like trying to win, and it's displayed. Well, what's on display in this casino is a Maserati, and the Maserati cars have the insignia of the trident, for Poseidon.
Oh my goodness.
And,
Oh my goodness.
Percy is the son of Poseidon, right? And so they get in the Maserati and drive off in it. But that's how they're able to escape the land of the Lotus Eaters. But that is probably one of my favorite of all time movies, movie scenes that reference the Odyssey. So this little scene in the Odyssey, I have to say, it's not that many lines. I mean, it's like 10 lines or so.
Yeah.
In the text, but it's had probably one of the biggest influences in terms of like modern reception.
Now, this is a perfect transition to Keith, who actually invited Rick Riordan to a class that Keith and I were teaching, and he was the head tutor for this class. Keith was exactly 5 years ago, October 16th, 2020 is when we have a record of this, which maybe Claudia can show. Keith may have to leave before we get to the full unpacking of what I'm about to say. And just between you and me and everybody else, dear Casey, Rick Riordan doesn't like the movie as much as he likes the series that he filmed for Walt Disney in Vancouver a few years later. And so we have to be diplomatic with Rick. Yes, we like the movie, but we like the movie because of his write-up in the original Lightning Thief. So that's Casey and Greg being diplomatic. In case Rick happens to view this video. So you don't have to take it back, because I enjoyed the movie version, and very much so. Oh, but here it is. And look, Casey, look what I republished just today. If you click on that, dear Claudia, if you click on the whatever, and it's going to be slow coming up. Hang on. But look at the title, In Lotus Hotel.
Yeah, I see
it. And what we recorded was 75 minutes of intergenerational conversations with Rick Riordan. He was there. And
so in the TV show, do they go to a hotel instead of a casino?
Oh yeah, Hotel Lotus. Oh yes.
Okay.
There it is. And maybe make it a little bigger, Claudia, because my old eyes can't handle it. Oh, much better. And now, if you scroll further down, look what I have in this republication exactly 5 years later. Keep scrolling further. Look, it's
Oh, wow.
minutes, but I actually took minutes and transcribed everything that everybody said. And if you keep going down, um, among the people there was, you'll see in a minute, keep going. Yeah.
Brother
Well,
was there.
we can't see the pictures here. That's fine. But anyway, look, we're now minute 48. I actually transcribed what I thought was important about every minute of the 75 minutes that Rick was visiting our class, Keith. And Keith, you should have the last word, because who knows when you have to depart from our happy group here, our happy office hours.
Right, yeah, I should leave in a minute. This is such a blast from the past. What can I say? To see these notes and to remember that conversation with Rick that I was part of with these students. Um, wow. Well, I do want to return to those times. I haven't lost the sweetness of homecoming by any means. That's all I can say is just seeing this is quite an experience. I'm glad that you republished it, Greg. I do have to leave, so I'm gonna do that now. But enjoy the rest of the conversation. Oh, and Claudia, I'll make you the host before I go.
And thank you for the sweet words.
So, Greg, I have a question. I'm kind of thinking about this connection between, the importance of maintaining a certain kind of mentality, right? This is super important for Odysseus, and I'm thinking
Yeah.
about that word naos,
Yes.
which is a key to achieving his nostos. But I'm wondering, like, how do we want to think about this in terms of, let's say, an audience member who is participating in or receiving a performance of epic. So, Casey, you were just talking about the idea that, things that are sweet, they're sweet good, but maybe sweet a little bit dangerous. And, we could see some connotation with that with poetry too at times.
Yeah.
The sirens they're singing is not so great, as opposed to the sweet words of Nestor. Maybe he's so great with the hexameter. So, I mean, is there also a message for the audience? Like, what kind of mentality do they need to maintain to stay in good relationship with their experience of hearing epic or poetry?
And dear Claudia, before Casey responds to your beautiful question, maybe we go back to full screen for there we go. That will be better for your editing, Claudia.
Yeah.
That is such an interesting question. And my mind is going in like all directions, because yes, if you think about the sirens and how the poetry can be so captivating that you might never leave it, that you might never be a part of the real world, right? Which Odysseus has all this time since the Trojan War been in a kind of never land, a kind of in-between state, and he has to cross back into like the real world where people will hear the kleos and where his actual home is and his family are, and so he's got to break free from it, and so in some ways you could make that analogy with the poetry too. And so what I'm thinking about, which just like comes to my head, and maybe you guys can react, is I remember a book that one of my former professors that Greg knows very well, Professor Charles Siegel, he had written a book where he talked about the Phaeacians as to whom Odysseus is telling all these tales as a kind of ideal audience, because they're so entranced by everything he's saying, and they never want him to stop, and they're so reverential, as he's performing like an epic poet. And of course, just like we were saying before about Nestor speaking in hexameter, of course, Odysseus is performing his tale in hexameter. So he is very much like an epic poet in every way as he's telling these tales, and they're just listening with rapt attention. But the Phaeacians are themselves in a kind of in between never land state. They're sort of not in the real world and not in the underworld, and they seem to be able to like they can transport people. That's what they do, and they can transport people across these boundaries, but they themselves are in the in-between. And so I wonder if that connects in any way to what you were suggesting about the dangerous power of poetry, and that they're kind of, and the way they're described, they're like always at leisure. They have all these boats, but they don't seem to do very much with them.
Mhm.
Um, they don't actually engage in trade or fishing or any of those things. They just have the fast boats, and they do transport people, right? That's the one thing they can do. They can transport Odysseus back to Ithaca. But I just wonder if them being an ideal audience is in part because they're sort of in this in-betweenness state. And so how do we apply that though to a modern audience, right? And a modern ancient audience in the real world? And I don't know, because yeah, there'd be this danger that you would keep listening like all through the night. We talked about all night, you know, lyric performances. What if you kept listening, you know, all through the night and never went back to your work, never left the festival, so to speak, never could never give it up? Of course, there's human limitations of the poets, but yeah, it's really interesting. I don't have an exact answer, but those are just the thoughts that came to my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I love that idea of up all night long, taking us back to that, because that's one of the things I was thinking about. Like, how do you maintain the right mentality through an evening like that, for the performance? And then also thinking about, well, isn't it great then that the heroes are so often absent, right? The ritual of the hero is that they're not there, and then they return for the festival or at the moment of epiphany or whatever, in the moment of rituals coming, and then they go away. Like if they stayed all the time, then we would be in a lot of trouble. And so it's sort of, there's a little bit of that baked in, right? A little bit of that control. But Greg, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I love this. And, you know, somebody that we should also mention. I'm so glad, Casey, you mentioned your dear former professor, Charles Siegel, another um, great reader of the Odyssey is Douglas Frame. And Casey, you're good friends with Doug, and so am I. And Claudia is a new friend. And Sarah, I don't know whether you've met Doug. And you've interviewed him actually, haven't you? So anyway, Doug Frame has this amazing book about how shall I don't want to be boring with linguistics, but there's a root, NES, which people who do Indo-European linguistics can reconstruct as meaning return to light and life. And it turns out that not only the word nostos, which is in the first 5 lines of the Odyssey, but also the word noos, which is also in the first 5 lines of the Odyssey, are both derived from this verb, this root that is reconstructed as NES, meaning return to light and life. And by the way, um, let's a nod to old Nestor. Nestor means he who returns people to light and life. And so his sweet talk and hexameter is also relevant, of course. But to get to the first 5 lines of the Odyssey, it's basically saying that Odysseus, because of his own epic, came to have an enhanced nous. He learned about the nous of other people, but he came to have his own enhanced nous. And so the best way to translate it, I guess, is mind, but it really means consciousness. And consciousness means what happens when you wake up from sleeping, when you come to. Notice I say come to. If you faint, if you pass out, then when you come to, okay, then it's a return, isn't it? Or, and this gets very, very tricky because Homeric poetry doesn't like to talk about life after death, but certainly the Odyssey is one gigantic symbol of coming back to life after death, returning to light and life. So the land of the Lotus Eaters, where people are munching on fodder as if they were cattle or sheep, what means that they blanked out, so they lose nos. And I haven't said it this way before, but I'll say it now. They lose their thinking about homecoming, and so
That's
if
right.
there's no nos, there's no nostos.
Exactly. So this is just one of several episodes, but it's a great example of that, where the men and Odysseus himself, run the risk of, because they've lost of losing their nous, and by losing their nous, then they lose out on a nostos.
Yeah.
And so that ties in perfectly with what Claudia was asking about the dangerous aspects of poetry, that you could be so entranced by the poetry, by the song being performed, the story being told, that you lose out on your nous. And then
Yes.
there's a metaphor there of kind of, not, I mean, I don't think it's saying you're gonna literally lose your life, but you're losing out on your consciousness, your light in life, your way of life, your ways of thinking. If you go too far with it, you do lose out on a nostos if you lose your nous. And poetry is shown in this epic as having that power.
Could I just ask quickly about the names of two of the characters in the
Yes.
Odyssey? And that's Antinous and
Yes.
Alcinous.
Oh.
And Claudia was talking about the Phaeacians being qualified to listen, which one of them does, and the other one kind of the antithesis of that?
Yeah, Alkinos, yeah. He who
And
has
both
the
of them
power.
are in like sort of feasting contexts, right? Because
Yes.
they're always feasting. And so, yeah, I mean, Greg would have much more to say about this, but, Alkinoos, the king of the Phaeacians, is said, he has a brave Naos. He's also the only one who notices
Yeah.
Odysseus is having this emotional, tearful reaction to hearing the songs about the Trojan War. He's the one that perceives it. So he has this like enhanced perception and an enhanced nous in some ways, right? And so his nous is like brave in some, way. And like, I like this word
Beautiful.
enhanced that Greg used. Whereas Antinous, he's part of the feast, but it's like a feast gone wrong. And
Yeah.
that he's overstayed his welcome by years. And I don't know what you make of the anti part of Antinous. I mean, obviously it means bad, but like, Greg, do you have like, how would you translate that if you had to translate it?
Well, the most neutral way to do anti is in place of. It's not so much against, but substitute. And this is a bad substitute. So it's not that he's stupid. It's just that he's got bad thinking. It's a substitute, an alternative way of thinking, which leads nowhere. And I'm so glad that Casey and Claudia and Sarah, you've all mentioned these other narratives in the Odyssey, which are all relevant, including the Song of the Sirens, because a lot of people think when they read Odyssey in translation in high school that the sirens are promising to sing pornography or something, X-rated. But what they actually say is, this will delight you, and we know everything that happened at Troy. Well, if
Yes.
Odysseus lingers and listens to everything that happened at Troy, it's, as you said, Claudia, that's dangerous. That is, and Casey, you said
He's
that too.
listening to the Iliad forever, right?
Listening to the Iliad forever, but he cannot ever get the number one kleos, the song of glory about the Trojan War. He'll never be the one who gets it. It's Achilles who gets it. Even though Odysseus destroyed Troy, he can claim, and rightly so, that his intelligence versus the muscles, shall we say, of Achilles were what really defeated Troy. However, whereas Achilles has to make a choice in Iliad 9, line 413, is the only way I can have an eternal epic is if I die young, if I give up my nostos and don't live to a ripe old age, but I'll have a kleos that is unwilting, like a beautiful flower that retains its color and aroma Okay, so Achilles has that choice. In a weird way, Odysseus has his cake and eats it too, but
He has to have both.
he has to have it. Exactly, dear Casey. He has to have both of them because without his nostos, he cannot have a kleos. He can't have a kleos for being the number one guy in the Trojan War. It's still Achilles, even though
And the
Achilles,
reason why, I just want to make sure everybody understands, not you guys, but the students, that that if he doesn't make it home, if he doesn't cross out of this alternative universe where he's been, no one is ever going to hear about these deeds. It's
yeah,
one thing for the Phaeacians to hear about them, but they're not in the real world. He's got
exactly.
to cross out and be in the known Greek world.
Yes,
And if he makes it home, he can tell the story, which he does, right, to Penelope.
yeah,
And then Penelope is going to be the one who can articulate these things when he dies, who, you know, and his song about the songs about him will be started. But he
yes.
has to get home for anyone to hear these stories because, you know, 99.999% of people are never going to be interacting with the Phaeacians and hearing these
Yes, that's
tales.
beautiful. It's just beautiful. And you know, dear Casey, what you just said meshes so beautifully, don't you think, Claudia? Because you were there when Olga was doing her um, her analysis of Odyssey 19 and Odyssey 23, where exactly what you said about uh, what 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 it takes for Odysseus to get into his Kleos and to have a successful Nostos, thanks to his wife Penelope, whereas um, certainly Agamemnon doesn't have a successful Nostos, and not even Achilles has a successful Nostos. How do you like that? And so
Absolutely. She is a key to it.
yeah,
And it all connects, I'm sure Olga talked about this too. It just all connects ultimately to the laments that Penelope will perform for
oh,
Odysseus.
that's
But
so
he has to
beautiful.
tell her the story, or if she doesn't know the story, then she can't tell it.
And
And
ideally, she's praying for his Nostos too. Like,
yeah,
just to take this back to Sappho, that we
yeah,
do have that beautiful song in which the sister is praying for the brother's return, right?
yes, yes,
So
yes,
you have to have that person who's going out
yeah.
needs to come back, and the people who are staying back need, like, it's the two of them together that creates a successful Nostos. You can't
Only
have it
that way.
without. And
No.
then also, I'm thinking about that beautiful passage in the Odyssey. I think it's when Odysseus's some men like went out on a little adventure and came back, and I think it says, and when they returned, it was like we had a homecoming, right? So
Yeah,
when the
yes,
other person returns,
yeah,
you have a Nostos. So
yeah.
assuming that as you hear about the hero's homecoming, you yourself experience a kind of spiritual
Oh,
Nostos
that
as
is so awesome. I love that so much. And I can't help but make a little quick connection to Iliad 10 and
Yes,
Odysseus
well.
and
yes,
Diomedes
yes.
going out on their ambush at night, and the Achaeans are back at camp waiting, hoping they come back, hoping they have Anastas from their ambush expedition. And when they finally do, it's like such a huge celebration, you know. So
Wow. And could I make a plug here for an amazing book authored by Casey and her colleague and friend, Mary Ebbett. So Casey Dué and Mary Ebbett, Poetics of Ambush, and it's all about Iliad 10. And wow, after you read that, you say, how could anybody ever imagine that the Iliad is complete without Iliad 10? Iliad 10 is vitally important. And you proved it, Casey, and you and Mary proved it.
well, and also just that I'd say for me, what I love about it is that it's such an old story pattern, such an old form of song
Yeah, yeah.
that a lot of people are like, oh, Iliad 10 is weird. It must be new and composed by some new weird poet. But in fact, it's some of the, I think, some of the oldest themes, some of the
Oh
oldest
yeah.
formulas
Oh yeah.
that we have. And now that, you know, I've lived in Texas for 25 years or so, I love some of the some of the aspects of the book too, you know, with connections to cattle raiding and all of this stuff. You know, we got Lonesome Dove with Larry McMurtry here in Texas. And there's so many, like, so all I'm just saying is that these kinds of poetics go so far back and they're still alive in
Oh,
Texas.
it's so beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think that's such a great place for us to close out today. It's such a beautiful moment.
Yes. Yes.
Casey, thanks for joining us again. You're amazing. And Sarah, you're
You
beautiful.
must come back, Casey, again and again. Nostos, nostos, nostos. And you too.
Always happy
Sarah.
to. It's so much fun.
Oh boy. Wow.
Okay, everyone. Until next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.